Hello there, class, and welcome to week 4 of Understanding Christian Marriage. Hope you are learning as you continue to read. And if you're married, hope you're applying those things. And if you're in ministry, hope you are able to use these tools to assist others in improving their marriage or preparing for marriage. And always, this is just great advice for others who are married, or you might use these in the future if you're not yet married. So this is going to be a beneficial class, obviously, as well for academic credit. Make sure you're staying up with the reading and staying up with Black Book assignments. Make sure that if you have any questions, again, reach out because you need to ask your questions. If you have them, don't feel that you can't ask them, please do. Again, you can reach out to me at my email address or at my phone number. I'll give that to you one more time. Email address is mark@rabbitcreekchurch.org. And cell phone, best to text 907-250-5166. Before we go to the Ballswick book today, I want to spend some time talking about a guide that you will find in your folder on Blackboard under week 4. And this is called the Resources for Marriage. And by resources for marriage, I mean reading material that can be used for the betterment of marriages. And these cover a variety of topics rather. And I want to go through those to give you just an idea of what you would be reading and studying if you were to check out one of these books, to buy one of these books, to offer the suggestion to someone else in these books. And the first and foremost is the Bible. This is something that is so important to read from Genesis to Ephesians to Corinthians to so many other places. It is going to be beneficial to all to read the biblical text. Also, finances, there's a couple great resources. There are Crown Financial and David Ramsey books. David Ramsey also has some online resources and podcast, etc. While neither one of these is perfect, both of them are helpful. And I encourage you to check into this area, particularly if finance is an issue. This is often one of the key issues of conflict within marriage. The two top issues in marriage that I deal with as I talk to couples are the topic of money and of sex. Those are two issues about which husbands and wives often have much disagreement. And therefore, it's important to be proactive, to study these issues, to look at the biblical perspective on these issues, again, from the Bible and from other books. We're going to be talking about money in those areas, but we also need to talk about sexuality. In regard to those, a couple great books are The Act of Marriage. This is actually a book that's several years old, but it is a very helpful book, basically talking about the intent for sexuality within marriage, but also some very practical advice for husbands and wives, written from a Christian perspective by a well-known author and his wife, The Act of Marriage. The other is Intimate Issues. This is a very helpful tool for particularly women, but good for men and women in regard to sexuality within the marriage. And it would be a helpful read to any who pick that up. As far as general ideas within marriage, there's some resources that you'll see on that document. And one is assigned to those of you who are on the graduate level of this course. And as with 5 love languages, even if you are not in the graduate level of this course and you'd like another book to read in regard to marriage, 5 love languages. If you have not checked this out, it is very helpful. This book by Gary Chapman that has sold millions of copies helps us understand where we are in life as far as the things that we need. We'll see if I can remember all of them off the top of my head, but there is the quality time. Some people are wired in the way that quality time spent with them, focused time spent with them is their love language. Acts of service. This is one where their love language is, let me see someone else do something for me. This is not selfishness. They're just touched by that. There's words of affirmation. Those of us who like pats on the back and the attaboys and the way to go. These really help us feel loved. And then there's touch, and this can be intimate touch between husband and wife, but also there are people that just like to have physical contact, to hug, shake hands, to fist bump. There's a sense of I'm connected. And keep it in mind, I'm not love language is not just talking about romantic love. So these are areas of life, mainly romantic love, but you'll see this in the father-child relationship. If there is a father who hugs and the child, if that and that speaks to the child, then that says to the child, I am loved. So that's important. And the other is gifts. This is something that says, again, not selfishly like acts of service, but gifts say, well, this person cares for me. Most people who have gifts as a love language aren't concerned with the expense of the gift, or if the gift is actually something that they uh, really wanted in the first place. It just means something to them that the loved one took time to go and shop or to Amazon click and get the gift to them. So these are the love languages. I encourage you to investigate that a little bit more. His Needs, Her Needs is another good book that deals with sexuality, but also much more than that. A good read. Also, the Love is a Decision is a good book, which is primarily focused, as the title would say, is love is not something that fades and blows with the winds. It is something that must be decided, must be committed to. You've heard me say in previous lectures about the 1 Corinthians 13 passage where it promises, biblically speaking, which means it's true, that love never fails. What happens is people fail to love. And this plays right into love as a decision. The other is A Model for Marriage. That is a good book which gives an understanding of how it might look in a healthy marriage between a husband and a wife. As far as spiritual growth, again, the Bible is primary, but also Quiet Time for Couples is a good one, uh, and as well as Closer, which is devotions for drawing couples together. Both of these will be devotional based and user friendly, and of course, online tools are nearly endless. Some dating ideas, the Dating Divas website. Men, don't be afraid of that. Even though it says divas, there's great ideas, very practical ideas, everything from just suggestions on how to communicate to actual dates laid out as far as how to go about it, describing it, what to buy, what to cut out. They have cutouts that you can print out and cut the create games, how you can turn a deck of cards into a romantic night, how you can turn the game of checkers into a romantic night, all sorts of things there. It can be helpful. Also, Q&A a day. These are books you can order online, and they're journals, some 3 years or some 5 years. You just keep answering the same question on that same day each year. And it's fun to compare the questions. So these are some things that you can use. There are many others, but those are some I wanted to highlight for you, for yourself in your marriage, or for you to use as you talk to other couples. We're going to talk about intimacy and sexuality today. And first of all, I want to talk about this word we find in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. So obviously, we're going way back in Genesis, which means this refers to Adam and Eve times. God has created Adam out of Adam and the rest of creation. God creates Eve. And so you have a man and a woman, which we've heard is not good for a man to be alone. And so the two become one flesh. And this is the beauty of the couple. Chapter 4, verse 1 says, Now Adam had sexual relations with his wife, and she became pregnant. Then she gave birth to Cain. Now, in verse 1, where it says had sexual relations, the word is yada, which means to lay with or to know or to respect deeply. I love the fact that one of the definitions of the Hebrew word yada is to respect deeply. Yes, it's to know. Yes, it's to lay down with. Yes, it is to have sex with another. but it's more than just physical contact. It's more than just laying down. It's more than just coming together for a purpose. It is coming together for a purpose which is respectful in nature. To respect deeply is a word or a couple words that help us understand the context of sexuality. So let's back up a little bit. Sexuality, what is it? It's husband and wife. That's what it's meant to be in within the context of marriage. And the act of sex is accomplishing mainly two things. That is the connecting physically of man and woman, but not just a physical connection. Within the context of marriage, it draws emotional connection. Now, this is one of the reasons it's important that sexuality is within marriage and not within dating, and certainly not with just hookups, because there is an emotional sharing, a mystery that even Paul talks about. There's some mystery to it. And when a husband and wife come together, or man and woman of any type come together, there's an emotional release, not just a physical release, which people said that they use the analogy of fire, that if you play with it out of the context, it's dangerous. This is sexuality because there's a bonding that happens between the person. Now, this does not mean that when people have sex that they're bound together forever. That happens in marriage. But there is an emotional experience to it. Now, this is why a respectful nature needs to take place. That there's this nurturing, that there's, yes, this feels good to each spouse, but it needs to be not just about feeling good to the spouse. So that's an overall picture of it. Now, accomplishes, in addition to pleasure, that's an obvious one. But in addition to this, it's the pleasure as a couple, experiencing pleasure, meeting each other's needs. Paul talks a lot about this. He says to not withhold yourself from each other except for a time of prayer, lest Satan come in and attack. This is important that husbands and wives have sex within their marriage. Obviously, there's different stages in life and different physical issues in life, but sexuality is important within marriage. There are groups within Christianity debate what you can and cannot use within sexuality in regard to birth control. And that's an issue we'll save for a different time. But it's important to know that regardless of what birth control to use or not use, that sexuality needs to be a part of the marriage. The other part of this is for procreation, obviously. The original intent of the way God designed it is that people go forth and multiply. That's the word God uses. And this is to further the human race so that more people can be born and people can love one another and more people can come into the presence of God as they choose Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. Obviously, you have to be born in order to get to that point. And so there's pleasure focused on the two, and there's procreation, and this is value to marriage. One of the things that it says on 165, it's a good note that we'll get to later, but when it talks about sexuality and its splendor, which is what the topic that chapter is going to talk about, Baldwin said this: it's not merely this sexual encounter that drives us. It's the complete one flesh experience of two persons becoming one through mutual vulnerability and responsiveness. Mutual vulnerability. If you go back to the statement in Genesis 2 about man and woman being created, it says they were naked and had no shame. In a marriage, there should not be shame, and there's vulnerability. There's vulnerability in giving one's body to another. There's vulnerability in standing in front of another with no clothes on. There's this vulnerability of expressing yourself through love to one another, and responsiveness, responding to the other's vulnerability. Not again, that shame should not be a part of this, and that mocking should not be a part of this, and the selfishness should not be a part of this. And that's a key importance to that. Respecting deeply, that translation of the word yada is such an important issue within sexuality. So on that note, we go to chapter 6, and on page 73 says this: there's no such thing as instant intimacy. And intimacy is born out of trust and safety an increasing scarcity of our world of suspicion and trust. Goes on to say, in fact, most people find it quite terrifying to give themselves wholeheartedly to another, even in marriage. The dread of being rejected keeps people from richest possibilities, intimate knowing. Now, what does that mean? What it means is when couples are in a marriage where they trust one another, where people are in a marriage where husband knows wife is going to stay by his side and wife knows husband is going to stay by her side, that there is a vulnerability that's healthy, a respect that is healthy, where they say, I can give myself completely physically and emotionally to my spouse. And when I do this, I trust that they're not going to mock me. They're not going to ridicule me. They're not going to be selfish with me. They're not going to be harmful to me. And this is where sex is literally at its best. Meaning that when sexuality is talked about in media and in Hollywood and various other places, there's this idea of how in the world can this be the most stimulating and the most physically a rush. Those certainly are part of sexuality. But there's so much fear in that with the STDs, with the uncertainty of a person's past, with obsession with personal pleasure, leading to people causing their sexual partner to feel uncomfortable about themselves and about things they're requesting. This is all done away with within a healthy marriage, where marriages come together and say, husbands and wives within those marriages come together and say, we're going to trust one another. We're going to be monogamous. We're going to be committed to one another. We're going to listen to one another. We're going to please one another. We're going to be taking this seriously, not as the item of marriage, but as a key item of marriage. Remember, I said earlier, we're talking about money is important and sexuality is important. Well, that's where we're focusing today because it is so important. We see on page 78 this idea of multiple types of intimacy. And before we get there, speaking some words from Thomas Oden, the authors say the heart of Christian marriage is to form a relationship bond in which two are better than one. Form a relationship with where two are better than one. That's God's design for marriage. Now, the Klein Bells in 1970 identified these forms of intimacy as we see on page 78. Multiple types: commitment intimacy, emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, intellectual intimacy, ascetic intimacy, creative intimacy, recreational intimacy, work intimacy, crisis intimacy, service intimacy, spiritual intimacy, communication intimacy, conflict intimacy, and attachment intimacy. We don't have to remember all those, but we need to know in connection with the 5 love languages, you're going to relate to these. So, for example, this idea of recreational intimacy, those people like shared time, like recreational intimacy. This way that we come together and have conflict well, creative ways to have this. This comes up in the words, people. The idea that words of affirmation help. This helps even in conflict to speak words of, while I disagree with you, I love you. While I am having this moment of conversation with you, know that it's done in love. These type of things. And we see this in various types of commitments. Now, I want to talk about 3 main areas of sexual intimacy that the authors focuses on. And first of all, it is sexual intimacy. Quoting from Paul Riker on page 79, the Balzacs have his words saying, when eros, this is the Greek word from which we get the erotic love. Remember the phileo love, which is the brotherly love. I think Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. You have the eros and you have the agape, that unconditional love. Eros is erotic love, that between a man and a woman. When eros is mated with tenderness and fidelity, authentic happiness and sexual fulfillment follow. This emotional leading to the sexual. And then there is the spiritual intimacy, which is so key. And I want to go to the book of Second Corinthians to read about this. This is Second Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. It says, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between between Christ and Belial?" Now, this is a description of what it looks like to have true intimacy spiritually, which is why Paul is saying it's dangerous to connect yourself emotionally and spiritually and physically to a person who's not of the right faith. We have three children, a daughter who's married, and two sons who are teenagers, and one off at college and one finishing his junior year in high school. And to all of them, we've had this conversation about dating and ultimately about marriage. And we talked to them about the fact, based upon texts like this, and just from common sense of believers, that one of the things you need to understand after you're attracted to a person, you need to understand what their faith is and what their values are. Because you can be very physically attracted to somebody and move to the point of dating and then move to the point of marriage. And if you haven't had that conversation of what are your spiritual values and are you a Christian, and then that can lead to problems because there's not going to be a spiritual connection. There needs to be a shared spiritual connection. And this is the key. And then we go to this idea of this crisis intimacy. Now, this sounds a little interesting, but notice here on page 81, one of the deepest healings in our life as a couple had to do with the untimely death of Jeff, our 9-year-old son, from bone cancer. I do not remember the statistics, but already the statistics of divorce are off the charts, and that's unfortunate. But you take those statistics and look at those who have lost a child, and those numbers are very, very high, where couples say, I just cannot grieve the same way you grieve, and I cannot heal the same way you heal. And therefore, a good number of, or shall we say, bad number of marriages that have experienced the death of a child have ended in divorce. That does not need to be the case because there can be crisis intimacy. If we go back to the book a couple pages ago, the Kleinbells referred to crisis intimacy as facing life difficulties and coping with stressors of life. Facing life difficulties and coping with stressors. This is what husbands and wives are to do, to support one another, to love one another. This is crucial to the faith. Now, when we talk about this idea of crisis intimacy, it makes me think of the book of Ecclesiastes, when we hear these words that are often talked about meaninglessness and being disenfranchised and disappointed in the pursuits of things of life. And then you get to chapter 4 and you look at verses 9 through 12, and it says this: two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and fails and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is a passage often used in weddings. I love this idea of two are better than one because they can have a great return on labor. I want you to notice 2 phrases. In verse 10, it says that when they fall down, certainly the loss of a child is a falling. It's a struggle. It brings you to your knees. But then this idea that one can be overpowered, but two can defend themselves. One can be overpowered by a physical enemy, of course. But also think about the spiritual attack of the devil, the one who comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. Think about the attack of grief. Think about the attack of depression. Think about the attack of misunderstanding. And whether it's loss of a children or something else that disrupts a family's life in a very life-changing way, saying two can't hold together. Notice the three they've talked about this idea of the sexual, the spiritual, and the crisis. My contention is if you have a spiritually rich marriage and a sexually rich marriage, when the things in life cause crisis, you have a far better chance of being together. If you face crisis and you don't have a spiritual connection, you don't have a sexual connection, you feel drifting, you feel separation, and it needs to come together. To the point of the sexual intimacy, on page 79, we see this one flesh concept in Genesis. We see as a sentence says, couples have the best of both worlds by attending to both aspects of intimacy. They're talking both about what they're calling the genital connection and the emotional connection. I've spoken about this just a minute ago, that when there is one, there is going to be the other. Then there can be emotional connection, non-sexual, with people that are dear friends. But that when there is genital connection, there's automatically going to be an emotional connection. And unfortunately, sometimes it's a harmful emotion. But when used rightly, it is a beautiful emotion. One of the quotes that I like from Daniel Aiken, he has shared this quote in his writings. He says in the book God on Sex, which was written in 2003, full title God on Sex, the creator's idea about love, intimacy, and marriage. I recommend that, in addition to other books I've mentioned. Dr. Aiken says this: sexual attraction is inevitable. Take that and think on it for a minute. Sexual attraction is inevitable. That's the way God designed us. Now, obviously, ultimately seen in the life of Jesus and others, his followers in the first century, that does not mean that there's lust involved right away. There are people, again, Jesus being the key example, who never lusted. He didn't sin, therefore he didn't lust. What this is saying is physically, we're going to see a person who is attractive. And God has designed men to be attracted to women and women to be attracted to men. It can be platonic in the sense of you can recognize a attractive person of the opposite sex and not want to pursue them. That's okay. That's natural. But there is a deeper level when a person chooses to pursue another person in a healthy manner. So sexual attraction is inevitable. It is what God intended. However, unless we follow God's plan, we will miss out on his best and suffer the painful and tragic consequences in the process. The Song of Songs, it's the book that is most romantic and erotic in the Bible. It's particularly in the Old Testament, but throughout the Bible, it is the most. The Song of Songs explains the purpose and place of sex as God designed it. When we make love the way God planned, we enjoy the security of a committed relationship, experience the joy of an unreserved passion, and discover the courage to give ourselves completely to another in unhindered abandonment. Within marriage, this is to be the case. It's not automatic. It has to be something that is developed over time as couples learn to trust each other more and more. When couples deal with whatever past pain they might have, either physical or emotional or spiritual. And this can be reached. There are passages, again, as I read previously, but Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 10, my beloved spoke and said to me, arise, my darling, my beautiful, and come to me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone, flowers appear on the earth. The cooing of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. This beautiful agricultural description filled with this romantic description. And that is healthy. On page 180, there is this wonderful understanding of the monogamous nature of being together as one. And it says here, comfortable balance, being close sexually and sharing a deep emotional level brings couples security. This is important because monogamy is the best place for that. it is the best place for husbands and wives to connect to one another. And when it's monogamous, there is that trust that is more easily developed. We're going to go on now to chapter 7. I'll give you a break from this video, go take a stretch, whatever. And so I'll stop this and we'll pick up with our next video here in just a minute.